Hello, I'm Ben Quilty. Tonight's story is about a mate of mine, former commando Mick Bainbridge, who I met and made paintings about when I was the official Australian war artist. Like many Special Forces veterans, Mick came back from Afghanistan mentally and physically damaged. And like many soldiers, he wasn't happy with the support he received for his injuries. But Mick fought back, using brand new weapons to take on the system and win.
I've been through a lot in Afghanistan. I've seen the best and the worst of outcomes that can happen on missions. We were always told, be a man, get up, do your job, you know, put it behind you, and I think it's not a healthy attitude.
The challenge that Mick had was mortal loss, friends that had been killed around him. Also, it's really hard to come back and then have someone say to you, we've now assessed that you're dangerous.
It's easy to call someone crazy to discredit them, but I knew what my rights were and I dug my heels in and I was fighting for my rights.
Mick was only after what he was entitled to, no more. But the way I see it is because he dared speak up, they didn't like that, didn't like having a private soldier, telling them how it is. I essentially said to him, don't get angry, don't get mad, just use the system and get even. Let's take them on from the front and the flanks.
As a senator, I've had many veterans come to me because they're actually being done over, not just by Defence but by DVA. But Mick's has been one of the worst ones, and it just makes me bloody ropeable.
You would think that there's a bit more power.
And a few times I said, Boehner, it is shameful that people deny you your basic support after what you've done, but you have to move forward and forget about them. And now to see Boehner is unbelievable. Standing up for veterans' rights with a level head and a big heart. But I just warn anyone, there's still that bubbling, seething thing in Boehner that most of them have. And I warn all of you, be careful of Boehner.
Mick wasn't a scholar. School was not Mick's thing. I would start school and try to develop a good family name reputation. And it took Mick a very short time to change that reputation. His goal was to finish school and then move on to the army.
I'd wanted to do the commando or be a Green Beret from the get-go, and I remember the recruiting centre in Parramatta, and they kept saying that, you can't just apply for that.
Mick's response was, nah. If I'm not going to be Special Forces, I don't want to be in the Army. So there was a clear determination, and that's what he achieved.
Run for the corn!
All of the guys in 2nd Commando Unit, they're the elite of the elite soldiers in Australia.
They are the first people on the ground in a war zone. These guys will possibly come back in a body bag.
I was in the 2nd Commando Regiment for nearly 13 years. I was 100% committed in terms of the job, but I did always keep a part of me separate from that. And in a sense, I always felt that I never really fit the puzzle. In my career, I've had 5 deployments. Every time you go out on a patrol, and everyone would have to write what they called dead letters. So a letter to your parents or significant other. You would carry your own body bags in your vehicle. I think I got really strange about death, and I just thought it was something that was going to happen.
You're shot at, you shoot back, people die on both sides, and then you come back, and then you go and do it again. Then they do it again. And they keep doing it. And they do it because they care about the team they're with.
Holy.
It was a bipolar lifestyle. I'd long to be home every time I was away, but once I'd get home, I'd miss the company of my mates. After a few trips, I realised that every time I came home it was harder.
We met on an aeroplane. He was travelling over to Dubai and I was on the flight going home to Dubai where I was living.
It's a little cliche. It's, soldier meets air hostess.
Love at first sight. I think we both knew pretty early on in the relationship.
Ironically, she's from the South Coast, so I had to travel all the way to the Middle East to meet a nice Australian girl.
I really liked his integrity, how honest he was, and he was just a lovely, funny guy. He has a great sense of humour, and I just felt at home with him.
I think Brooke knew that I was a bit rattled from work. I'd never really discussed it with her.
He'd have this time with me and sort of feel like he was on holidays in a sense, and then on the other side, such an extreme, he'd go back to Afghanistan and essentially go to war. So I think it was a strange time for him and for me.
What Brooke wouldn't have realised was coming down range were the burdens that Mick brought with him.
As a soldier, you see the best and the worst of the human condition. In 2009, losing my mate Mason Edwards in a training accident. Unfortunately, he was shot in the head. We did all we could to try and keep him with us. It was a frivolous attempt, but I think that affected me deeply. And then not long after that was the Black Hawk helicopter accident.
This is a tragic day for Australia.
3 soldiers died, another 7 were injured, some seriously.
Losing 3 of our blokes, it was a big loss. Attended the funerals for each one and it took it out of me. I think then I really started to notice the wheels was well and truly starting to come off.
After each trip to Afghanistan, there was a change in mood for the worse, and particularly by the end of his army career, he was in a bad way.
In 2012, I was invited by the Australian War Memorial to travel to Afghanistan as the official Australian war artist.
Archibald Prize-winning painter Ben Quilty has just come back from Afghanistan, where he spent a month documenting the experiences of Australians at war.
When I got back to Australia, I then followed up quite a few of the soldiers and I invited them to the studio and I asked them to tell me more of the stories.
I think just telling Ben about it has probably opened his eyes a little bit to some of the events that occur.
One of the things about Baino's 2nd Commando Unit is that there's protected identity status. So their image is never portrayed, their names are not portrayed.
It definitely knocks everyone around, but again, we have to pick up and keep working towards our goal. And that's just work.
When I met Baino, he was an anxious mess. The fact that he'd been in 2nd Commando Unit meant that he was someone. He was really someone. And when I met him, he was a broken no one. And I was intrigued and I asked him to model for me that day.
I didn't know what the Archibald Prize was, let alone Ben Quilty. So you can imagine how concerned I was when I met this bloke and he offered me a beer and asked me to get my gear off.
Having subjects in the studio, I already had them nude, which was confronting for me and them. And it was meant to be that the awkwardness sort of resembled the experience in a sense.
As Ben and I became mates, I guess I told him a few things. I was involved in the Black Hawk helicopter crash in 2010.
He told me he pulled people out, he pulled his friends out of the helicopter.
I remember the ammunition boxes, the rounds were cooking off in the fire, so not only were we trying to extract people out of the wreckage, we were trying to not get shot indiscriminately by bullets that were on fire. I remember the blood, the smell, inhaling the smoke and vomiting from it. It's seared in my memory, I think, forever. I think Ben really captured how I was feeling at the time, which was I was lost. And I knew then that something was seriously wrong and I wanted to do something about it. I couldn't go back on another trip. I couldn't do it anymore. I built up the courage and I went and saw the command about the possibility of being posted to a training location for a few years and told them what I was struggling with, and I was pretty shocked at their response. They said either go on the next trip or we will f*** you off.
They didn't want anything to do with him. When he eventually, sought help for PTSD, he was ostracised from the command.
I was treated as a leper. I was told, go home and we don't want anyone else getting sick. And that was the response. I was drinking a lot, I was taking risks. So I was sitting at home with no job. I felt like I had no identity and no purpose. It was a very lonely stretch.
I was worried. There was just a complete lack of clarity on his part as to what the future held for him, and a depressed state of the circumstances he was in.
I was devastated for him. I guess I had to pick up the pieces and try and put him back together as best as I could.
I went from a role in defence that was, a very aggressive role. They say controlled aggression, but I think there's a point where it becomes uncontrolled aggression. And I think the only response I knew was that angry response. I never went and took action with any of that, but I think it was a searing anger that was really unhealthy and unhelpful to my recovery.
I met Mick in Afghanistan in 2010. He was there with his commando company, and I was there as the legal officer. When I left the regular army, I began picking up veterans' work. There you go, mate. Cheers, mate. I got a call from Mick. He said he wanted to come and see me about some issues he was having. Mick was struggling with post-traumatic stress disorder and related mental health issues.
My injuries were mainly mental health and also just a lot of physical injuries over the period of my career. I needed hearing aids. I had, severe bilateral hearing loss and a busted back, fractures, nerve impingements, slip discs from parachuting night and day, hitting the ground at 10 metres plus a second. I was just after the basic recognition of my injuries and assistance to transition, and it wasn't there.
Here we go.
I definitely didn't want to be on a pension, not in my late 20s and early 30s forever. I don't believe in the victim-orientated system. I wanted to do something else and move on with my life. The command members I do. They were adamant that they didn't care, right or wrong, that they just wanted me out of defence. Just got no real understanding.
The reality of programs from defence to support the transition of soldiers is complex. The problem we've got is that bureaucracies largely write rules and policies and assign budgets, and they don't really cover themselves in glory when it comes to emotional assistance.
They've even asked me why I keep fighting.
For Mick, he's largely had to self-advocate because he was the lowest ranking soldier. He was a private.
I found out about a program called the Extended Transition Program, where Defence would help pay for the first half of a university degree. And I wanted to study law.
This Extended Transition Program is a fantastic policy piece that I think that Defence didn't really want private soldiers doing. I think they'd like to have these sorts of programs available for officers.
There's certainly a class system in Defence. The commissioned officers definitely look after their own before they look after the other ranks. They had said that it was unlikely that someone who wasn't an officer would be able to, conduct tertiary education, let alone a law degree. It did seed a lot of self-doubt. They IQ tested me twice for it, and even after I'd passed the uni testing, they still questioned my ability to do it. Defence eventually did begrudgingly pick up that tab.
When he started studying, he just said, I really enjoy this stuff. This is feels like what I'm meant to do. And that was a great thing to hear.
The transition out of defence into the civilian sector is not a particularly good process, and certainly not in Mick's case. He was treated very, very poorly. There's a process called welfare boards to help you as you transition out of defence, and he asked me to go along as his support person.
They knew my health wasn't the best, pointed that out and fought to get access to hearing aids and other medical necessities. And I put him on the spot for it. It became very volatile and very nasty.
Mick was only after his entitlements, but by him being vocal about those things, I suspect they didn't like that, didn't like having a private soldier, telling them how it is. As a result of that, they then decided they were going to take some of Mick's pay entitlements away from him and then post him out of his unit, which was unheard of. Because he dared speak up, they were treating Mick differently to the way they treated other members who were transitioning out of that environment. So I walked out of there quite disgusted.
When I got home, I was upset. I'd had a few heated discussions with the bosses on the phone, and but nothing out of line. And the next day, Brooke comes through and says there's a whole bunch of police out the front. One of the commanders had called the police and had said that I'd threatened self-harm and that I was a former Special Forces soldier and, explosive expert.
Like a lot of police turn up in body armour. They were told an ex-Special Forces soldier, highly trained, has just threatened suicide. And there was no threat of suicide. Mick didn't threaten suicide to these people.
I was with him the whole day. I know what phone calls he made, what he said on the phone, and I know what was alleged didn't happen.
Words can't describe how it makes me feel. To have that toxicity, that venom, brought into my house. It was a huge event for my family. It affected my son and my wife. The fact that they put someone that's in that position in harm's way in that sort of manner it's truly disgusting.
I don't blame the police for responding in the way they did, but they were responding to a nonsense complaint, in all honesty, to what on its face looks like a malicious complaint.
The police officer who was recording the incident in his notebook had said that it seemed like a malicious and vexatious reporting, and false reporting like this was in fact a criminal offence.
Mick and I met with Senator Lambie about this issue. She got up and mentioned it in the Senate because the way you hold people in those positions of authority accountable is by naming them.
Mr Bainbridge has disclosed to me following our meeting that the trauma he experienced as a result of the armed police raid on his family home was greater than all the experiences of battle against Australia's enemy in the Middle East. I was sort of Mick's last hope. All Mick actually wanted was to continue with his military career and move out of that, move into a training establishment. I don't care if you've got a little bit of PTSD. I don't care if you're missing a limb. If you still want to stay in the military and you're still physically and psychologically able to share that experience and make sure that is shared through the new generation coming through, then that's what we need to be doing.
I think my biggest concern was how it was going to affect Mick. He was just doing so well with uni and getting out of the army and making that transition, and I was worried that it would take him years to recover from.
Will the Bainbridge family be compensated through a special mediation process, or will they be forced into a lengthy legal battle?
Senator Payne, the Minister for Defence, since you raised your concerns with her, has personally committed to ensuring that Private Bainbridge is provided with the best possible support.
I was absolutely assured by the Defence Minister, Marise Payne, that my matter would go to mediation. But a year's passed since that date, and Defence are still very much dragging the chain on that one.
This is worth a Senate inquiry, and Mick's not the only one. This is a very bad culture of behaviour with those high-ranking officers right throughout the military, and it needs to be stopped.
Coming out of, special operations, I think that there's a sense that all you know how to do well is to fight. Studying law, I quickly learned there's another way to approach this, and the formula is learn how the legislation works, learn how their decisions are made, and follow the process.
Mick started going through, the law and the mechanisms to take on defence. He can write a very good letter addressing the issues, the facts, and the law and policy supporting his position. I was simply there to sort of steer him and to cast my eyes over it to make sure that what was going out was good. That's it there. Yep. Mick finally received his veterans' entitlements from Defence, and he did leave the Army. Talking about PTSD. And that's when he came up against the Veterans Affairs space. And again, the circle of constantly beating your head against the wall starts again.
Was it 2006?
Yeah.
The major difference between dealing with Defence and the Department of Veteran Affairs is Defence can be a venomous space where personalities come into play. With DVA, I recognise fairly quickly that it's a bureaucratic, process-driven beast. So long as you follow the process, there's a light at the end of the tunnel. There was a good 4 years it took me to have my claims accepted by DVA.
Some veterans had a really bad experience with dealing with the department as bureaucratic and in some instances adversarial. But importantly, we're learning from people like Michael Bainbridge, who did have a difficult experience with us, and we've listened to him and we've adapted how we engage with our veterans to make it easier.
Now, both these guys are on DVA white cards. So, Mick, you might want to trace up where they are with their DVA stuff too.
I had begun to learn more about the trade at uni, and Glenn asked me if I wanted to do some pro bono work. The maximum payout is about $430,000. That's from quadriplegic to the vegetative state.
Mick doesn't get paid anything, but nor do I. But he, I took him on as a legal researcher while he's studying law.
Is he still in, or is he? No, he's out. I just got involved, and I was able to go out and help a lot of former colleagues through their issues in Glenn's office. GP doctor at DVA. I always thought that there was a better way to go through my transitions, and I started looking into some of these ex-service organisations, and the RSL stood out to me. They had lost relevance over the last 15 years, and younger veterans felt that they were being failed by groups like RSL. If you want things to change, you have to get on board the rocket ship and get a box seat, because we've got to do this right.
Today, the New South Wales RSL has voted overwhelmingly for a new direction at the top.
Mick came on board with the new council, the youngest councillor ever elected to the RSL.
There's going to be a lot of change that will take months to repair and disentangle from the issues we've been suffering. Lo and behold, now I'm the state vice president, and I do have that say, and I'm really excited for where the organisation's heading.
For someone that only a couple of years ago was really struggling, someone who had come out of the army and didn't know what they were going to do with their life. So the fact that he's been able to make that transition, I think, is really significant. Points the way for a lot of other veterans as well.
Yeah, well, he made one for the Queen, for the Victoria Cross. I've got a long road to travel, and this RSL and this board, we desperately want to curb and stop the suicide rate. I lay awake at night thinking and wondering how I'm going to make this thing work, and I'm not going to stop till I do.
Mick's leading the RSL to the future. Mick is an advocate, a coach, a director, a leader. He's all of those things, and yet he's a private. Profound.
I don't think you'll ever speak to a veteran that hasn't had some form of issue with Department of Veteran Affairs. But rather than being critical, I'd like to work with the organisation, because I think together, RSL and DVA, we can better achieve the outcomes that we all want.
I deal with Mick a lot. Mick gives me frank and fearless, and I welcome that, and I always appreciate it. A lot of our staff haven't lived the experience that Mick and others have, so he can help educate us and he can help influence the program.
I didn't really always feel like I fit the puzzle with the Army, and with the law I feel for the first time ever that this is exactly what I'm meant to be doing. So hopefully I can put it into action for a good cause.
And he hasn't just succeeded, he's done exceptionally well on this course of study. How wrong were defence? We just saw Mick receiving the most prestigious scholarship that Wollongong Uni has to offer.
I won the Jack Goldring Scholarship. I'm immensely proud of it. The best thing was having the kids there to accept it with me.
Personally, I think it's almost inspiring to see how he has just grown as a person and just developed on these new skills that he has had to learn while he's been studying law and doing his work with the RSL as well.
Come on, mate.
He couldn't have done it without Brooke, to be perfectly honest. Brooke has really been a central, comforting force for Mick.
Some of the green. And I owe everything to her, and we've got 2 beautiful kids now, and I'm one of the lucky guys. I've got an absolute, amazing wife. Come in here, mate. Look at this. I love being a dad. I'm really proud to be a dad. And my son is named Mason. Mason Edwards was a top mate, so a bit of a namesake. If he's a bit like him, then yeah, I'd be pretty stoked.
He's a new man, spending time making cubby houses for his kids, building a beautiful garden.
Come and help Dad.
He rings me up for advice about how to grow tomatoes. It's like, Bano, really? Yeah. Benny, what sort of sulphur do you use? Do they like urea?
That's an old commando dagger.
Of someone who risks so much for our strange country to now have turned it around with the gusto of someone from the 2nd Commando Unit. I'm so proud of him as a mate.
And the old green beret. I don't think I'll ever wear this old girl again, but...
I think the skeletons may be still out there, but the future is a whole different thing for Mick Bainbridge.